Today's video is sponsored by Squarespace. I have had a few comments over the past couple of years or so about people saying that they wish they could have studied classics, but classics was never an option because they didn't study it at school, because they didn't go to a high enough ranking school. I suppose that's more from a UK perspective, potentially also in America. I'm not familiar with that over there, but I can say I completely understand where they're coming from. I have frequently said over the past few years that I am not a real classicist. And what's quite funny is I met someone who recently, she went to university, she did her undergraduate in classics. And then when I said, oh, you're a classicist too, she went, I'm not a real classicist. And I was like, same. Even though I'm studying it at a doctorate level, I am still not a real classicist. I can only talk about this from a UK perspective, but I completely understand the barriers to entry when it comes to classics. I didn't get to study classics at school either. There was no option. None of my schools taught ancient history or Latin or classics, which I know a lot of posher schools did in much more affluent areas, or even grammar schools for very clever people. When I studied classics at university for the first time, I did it as a joint honours with English literature. I was so out of my depth, and that feeling never really went away. And I thought I'd discuss about not being a real classicist because a lot of it is interconnected with many forms of discussion, whether that's class, educational background, or even just access. Let us explore it together, because I don't think I'm the only one at this stage in my life who still doesn't feel like a real classicist, and why classics in particular drives people to say that. Potentially there's a thing where people say, oh, I'm not a real biologist, or I'm not a real engineer. Potentially that is the case if you're not working in that field. But classics isn't really a field where you can get a job in. It's very rare that anyone gets a job in classics after graduating, and yet you still feel people say that phrase quite a lot. And I've noticed a trend where it tends to be that those of us who say I'm not a real classicist are those who did not study it at school, as if school education is of a greater quantifying measure of how well you understand classics in the ancient world than a university degree. You know, I was speaking to someone a couple of years ago who had completed her PhD in classics, and when I asked her about getting job positions, just as a casual chat with her, she said, well, I'm not a real classicist, so, and then it went on to say other things, and this girl had completed her doctorate just a year prior in classics and was still using the phrase, I'm not a real classicist. Now, I personally don't identify myself as a classicist because I'm not fluent in ancient Greek and I only know primitive Latin. I haven't done Latin for over a decade, though I did study it at university. I did beginner's Latin, intermediate Latin, and advanced Latin during my 3 years at university. And though other academics in the field have told me that I probably will pick it up faster than I give myself credit for, I have little faith in my ability to do that. I don't really specialise in looking at the ancient sources in depth in terms of translation. I look at the ancient sources in relation to contemporary discussions of literature and politics. So I don't feel like a real classicist because I'm not completely immersed in that world. I kind of teeter between the two fields of contemporary society and ancient society. Whereas I feel more real classicists are the ones who are posited entirely in the ancient world and within that realm, and particularly those who specialise in translation. I suppose there's a lot of imposter syndrome when it comes to academia in general, but I've always had a funny relationship with ancient history and classics because it almost feels like it's impossible to know everything. You are expected to know everything as a classicist, whereas you're not expected to know everything as an English literature student. Someone who is in English literature is expected to know of their field per se, so they could be a Victorian literature student, but then asking them a question on Shakespeare is seen as a bit absurd. If they specialise in Victorian literature, they shouldn't be able to speak to you fluently about Shakespearean literature, although they probably do know something about Shakespeare plays. However, as a classicist, I feel like you're expected to know everything. So you're meant to know Latin and ancient Greek. You're also meant to know about ancient Roman Empire, as well as ancient Greece, and also all about archaeology, and also about literature, and also about architecture. But you're also meant to understand Hellenic poetry and the Byzantine era. And it's quite funny how there's a massive pressure on people who are into classics to know a bit, or actually quite a lot, about every single different field, and the same expectation is not expected of people from other subjects. I suddenly feel like as a classicist, you're kind of expected to know everything about anything to do with the ancient world, and potentially also in a very westernized way, only Greco-Roman. And as such, because we don't know all about, say, Latin and ancient Greek, you only speak one of them, you immediately become siphoned as not a real classicist, not only by yourself, but your peers. And with all due respect, all education is incredibly elitist. Even as someone who is self-funded as a PhD student, and I spent many years saving up money just to be able to do this, I'm struggling financially to be an academic. And I realised, even with classics in particular, it feels even harder to be an academic, and I'm feeling the weight of my background, my lack of financial support and my lack of financial upbringing in the classics world as being a real hindrance to my success in this field as an academic, which is heartbreaking to say the least. But before we get more into my thoughts, I'd like to take a quick moment to thank today's sponsor, which is Squarespace. Squarespace is an all-in-one website platform for entrepreneurs to stand out and succeed online. So whether you're just starting out or managing a growing brand, Squarespace makes it easy for you to create a beautiful website, engage with your audience, and sell anything that you want, whether that's products or content or time, all in one place and all on your terms. If you're completely new to building websites, then you can design a gorgeous, unique, and professional looking website tailored to your brand with Squarespace. Squarespace Blueprint has all these preset designs for you that you can choose from, and with Squarespace's integrated, optimized SEO tools, you can get your new website created, launched, and discovered so quickly. And you don't need to know anything about coding, thanks to Squarespace's next generation website editor, Fluid Engine, which lets you just drag and drop your content where you want it, whether you're on desktop or on your mobile. And if you're a freelancer creative wanting to launch your own courses, then Squarespace is the perfect place for you, because you can just upload videos and then add a paywall, and you can set prices, so whether that's charging a one-time fee or you can sell subscriptions, whatever works best for your brand, Squarespace has it all covered. So whether you want to expand your business or just build a beautiful website for your blogging leisure, then go to squarespace.com for a free trial, and then when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/lady of the library to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. I know I went into talking about ancient history online to try and bring down the barriers and make ancient history more accessible to other people, because I didn't have access to that. I didn't have YouTube growing up. YouTube wasn't a thing until I was around 17 years old, really, and there wasn't many history videos on there. And I feel like it's one of those subjects, classics, where even though it doesn't bar you to entry, because everything you can learn from a book, you feel so inferior to those who are more well-travelled, who did learn Latin at school and they are far more fluent in it, or ancient history, or their parents also studied classics, so their child went into classics world and they saw all these amazing sites growing up and they were able to go on these adventures. And it makes me feel sad when I see comments on my video where people are saying, like, I never got the opportunity to study classics because I didn't study it at school. And yes, you do have to go in the backwards way. Like, I could only study classics because I took it as a joint honours option. And I know several people who also did joint honours with me in classics and English literature did so through the same means. They never studied classics at school or Latin or ancient history, but they managed to do it through a joint honours mechanism in the UK. But it makes me sad that that was a reality. And that barrier to entry in terms of only quite high schools, quite privileged schools, whether you're incredibly academic or you're incredibly privileged and you go to a very expensive fancy school that teaches ancient classics, this subject is elusive to those of us, even at this level. Even studying it at this degree, we still feel isolated. And I'm feeling the pressure of not being able to even attend conferences financially, let alone then go to foreign countries to see the things that I'm potentially writing about, to even see parts of, the culture that I'm writing of, or the origins of even the museum artifacts that may relate to my research. I can't afford to go and visit them. And that feels heartbreaking. But it makes me a little bit more determined. Whilst my success in the academic world may be fleeting, I may not complete my PhD due to financial concerns that I have, that I can't sustain this work, study, lifestyle, sadly. That's a reality. And because the subject that I'm studying is not fruitful in terms of potential job prospects, that is also hindering my passion to pursue it. Because of the financial situation that I'm in, going to complete such a thing and spending more of my money to complete it may seem like a fool's errand. And having this realization now, it also makes me feel hopeful that I can potentially invest more into making more accessible history videos in the future. I've been struggling the past few months because I've been trying to catch up with my studies at the expense of my work, and it's almost an impossible balance. It's incredibly hard to write things for publication or for research and also work. Everyone will tell you that. I don't think I'm unique in this situation. But the more financially unfortunate you are, and the less, if any, family help that you have, makes it even harder. And when you feel like you're on a lower footing than everyone else because you didn't have the privileges afforded to you growing up with earlier access to classics, you feel like you're always behind people, and you feel like a fraud, and you feel like you're not a real classicist because you lack the experience or wealth of childhood access to classics and ancient history. But I hope that maybe potentially if I work harder on my videos, not that I don't work hard, but try and create a sustainable system, I can keep making history accessible to people in whatever way I can, because I realize how important it is. I may not appeal to a younger audience. I'm not exactly, cool and hip and able to appeal to a younger audience, but I potentially can at least create the content that may help people break a barrier. Even if they don't study it officially, I can potentially be part of a solution in which classics is not so elusive to everyone, and is not so behind closed doors, and is not so closed off from people due to their financial background or their upbringing and status and access to education. Because it does mean a lot to me, and it'd be terrifying and devastating to have to leave it behind formally because I can't financially support it myself, and realizing how much of my own upbringing and my lack of access to classics is now still hindering me later in life. But I shall continue to endeavour in making it a fun subject. History in general, a fun and accessible subject. And I hope that even if I make smaller videos and embrace my love of learning and sharing that love of learning with other people, that I can make it on a more global scale, an accessible subject, and potentially help be part of the change that helps shift this barrier, so someone in my position in 10 or 20 years time does not find themselves in my position, that doesn't find that they are put at a disadvantage of not having access to the literature or even the media, such as my YouTube videos, to have learned about subjects in a way that is organic but also well researched and authentic, and helps them enter a field that they don't feel like they are so far behind. Because I do feel like I am 15 years behind everyone else in my subject, and I will never make up that 15 years. And I'm also potentially 2 generations behind financially to be able to sustain my interest and love in the subject. But I will try and I will endeavour. Even if it means I don't become a doctorate in the subject, I will continue to endeavour. But I hope you found this discussion interesting. Let me know down below if you have any similar thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts on just this subject. And maybe if you study a different subject and you feel actually this applies to this subject as well, please enlighten me, because obviously I can only talk from my own experience. I don't know about other people's. But I hope you are happy and healthy, and remember, books save lives. So keep reading.